That's what this pop-up you all just got on your screen. And this briefing is organized by CZ Risk, Fish, Oceana Europe, ClientEarth, the Fisheries Secretariats, the Bund für Umwelthilfe und Naturschutz Deutschland, Ecologistas in Acción, France Naturel Environnement, and the Danish Society for Nature Conservation. In today's briefing, we will provide you with key background information on important issues at stake in the setting fishing limits in the EU, UK, Norway, in the context in the Northeast Atlantic, and of course, mainly from an EU perspective, as this is where all our NGOs are mainly focused on. And we have chosen to highlight several examples of the EU's failure to implement the environmental constraints of the common fisheries policy and the detrimental effects that has on some of the most fragile species in our waters. We have 5 presentations, short intervention of max 5 minutes each. And after that, we open the floor for questions. So the first speaker is from ClientEarth, Arthur Meus. He will be speaking on the ClientEarth's legal actions against the EU for failing to set fishing limits in line with science and the law. The second speaker is Javier Lopez from Oceana Europe. He will be speaking on the most depleted stocks in EU waters. Third speaker, Nikki Sporong from the Fisheries Secretariat. She will be talking about European eel and the urgent need to protect this highly threatened species. Then we have Gonzalo Carvalho. He will be speaking on the need to be extra careful with setting limits for deep sea fisheries. And our fifth speaker is Rebecca Hubbard from Fish. And she will be talking about the ecosystem and carbon values of restoring fish populations. So as I said, each speaker will go in turn. And you can, during the talks, could already put questions in the chat. And but afterwards, we'll have a Q&A to take care of all these questions. And also you can then raise your hand and we will give you the floor. Regarding the translation, how we'll probably do this is that you can ask your question in either English, French, or Spanish. We will repeat it back in English, so all the English speakers hear it, and then reply also in English, and then go through translation in that, because that's probably the best way to do this. And without further ado, I then would like to give the floor to Arthur from ClientEarth to start his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Irene. Can you, just to check, can you hear me well? Okay, that's perfect. So I'll just share my screen and I'll ask you whether you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, that's perfect. So thanks everyone. And thanks, Irene, for the introduction. So my name is Arthur Meus. I'm a fisheries lawyer at ClientEarth, and I'm leading on different cases and legal action on unsustainable fishing limits. So the title of this short presentation is "See You in Court: ClientEarth Legal Action Against the EU's Failure to Set Fishing Limits in Line with Science and the Law." So for this presentation, I will first quickly give you the background which has led ClientEarth to take 4 different legal actions, and then I will give you a broad overview of our different cases and the state of play. So, okay, yes. As you might be aware, a decade ago, the EU has set a legal deadline to end overfishing by 2020 at the latest. This was a commitment. This is a legal obligation, which is now basically the overarching objective of the Common Fisheries Policy Basic Regulation. But unfortunately, it has been years that ministers have kept ignoring the science when setting their fishing limits, especially in the December Council for the Northeast Atlantic. And basically, this also goes against the obligation, as you can see at Article 3 of the Common Fisheries Policy, to follow the best available scientific advice. And still today, in 2022, 1/3 of the fishing limits set by the Council were still above scientific advice. And also, as it's the STECF reports highlight, around 20% of stocks in the Northeast Atlantic are still overfished. And according, for ClientEarth, this is unacceptable, especially because all this is illegal. Indeed, by setting fishing limits above scientific advice, ministers have allowed overfishing for too many years. As we know, this is undermining the health of the whole marine ecosystem, as well as the future of fishers and coastal communities. So we decided to take legal actions. As a broad overview, you can see that we have taken legal actions in 2020 against France and Ireland, and really recently we've taken legal actions against the Council of the EU directly. So here is a broad overview. I will just start with our last cases in 2022. So last month, we just filed our last case before the Court of Justice of the EU to challenge the fishing limits of 2022 for EU-only stocks and for stocks shared between the EU and the UK. Thanks to the new rules on access to justice, this is the first time that we were able to directly take the Council to court. Basically, these rules now allow citizens and NGOs to ask the review of EU decisions that we think break environmental law. And if the institutions refuses to amend its decision, NGOs and citizens can then go to court. In all cases, as the Council refuses, it was last summer, refused to amend the contested fishing limits following our request, we decided to bring the case in front of the Court of Justice. And basically, these two legal actions that we've taken against the Council are not the first one, because in 2020, we also went to court, but this time against Ireland and France, because we had to choose an indirect route through national courts before the new rules on access to justice. In those cases, we challenged the fishing limits of 2020 before the High Court of Ireland, where we supported French of the Irish Environment. And we also challenged these fishing limits in France before the Administrative Court of Paris, where we brought the case together with Bloom Association and Défense des Milieux Aquatiques. Our purpose at national level was to ask for the case to be referred at EU level. This is what has been done by the Irish judge, who concluded in his judgment that he had serious doubt that fishing limits of 2020 were set in respect with the objectives of the CFP. The case has therefore been referred and is now in the hand of the Court of Justice of the EU. As for our case in France, as a consequence of a critical judicial inaction in France, we still don't have a hearing at national level even scheduled. So although the case was submitted in France, I think more than 2.5 years ago. So we are still waiting for an hearing at the Tribunal Administratif de Paris. But overall, we should expect judgment for most of our ongoing cases that I've just presented to be ruled by the end of 2023. And maybe quickly to conclude, as ministers will soon fix the fishing limits in the Northeast Atlantic for the following year, so in 2023, we are really asking them to follow the science and to respect their legal obligation. They are legally bound by their commitment made 10 years ago to end overfishing by 2020 at the latest. It's already 2 years ago and it's not the case yet. We know that this is key for the future of fishers and coastal communities. And this is also crucial for the health of our ocean. And as Rebecca will present, to fight climate change. And we really much hope that judicial power might be an additional incentive for them. Thanks very much.
Thank you. After, if you can stop sharing your screen, and then I'll invite Javier Lopez from Oceana to start sharing his screen and present on the most depleted stocks in Europe and the needed action for those.
Yeah, I think now it's done. Sorry, because it seems that I had a small issue with internet connection. So thank you, Irene. And yes, my presentation is going to be focused on the status of the most overexploited stocks. Also, I will try to provide some reasons that may explain this status and obviously final recommendations on how to solve this situation. Let's see if I'm able to pass my, yeah. So as Arthur was commenting, there are some management commitments in terms of the conservation of the fish stocks. And the main one that is included in several international and domestic agreements is the request commitment to recover and maintain stocks above healthy levels. These healthy levels are named as MSY. So, and it's a kind of reference point that I will develop further, but the idea is, yeah, to recover and maintain the stocks above this reference point. And as I said, this commitment is included in many different European Union legislation, but also around the Northeast Atlantic. So I will highlight, for example, the Common Fisheries Policy, the UK Fisheries Act, even the United Nations Fish Stock Agreement. So this is a fundamental, as it is said in the slide, and shared objective for the management of the stock. But this is not happening. So having a look to the latest scientific advice from ICES, which is the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, we can check what is the status of the stocks. So to give you an overview about the different possibilities, I have summarized them in 3 situations. So when the stocks are above this MSY level, this maximum sustainable yield level, it's considered, the stock is considered to be sustainable. And when it is below this reference point, this MSY, the stock is considered to be overexploited. But in this case, we are going to focus on the ones that are severely overexploited, the ones that are considered depleted, that are the stocks below deem reference point. That, for your information, is a reference point is an abundance level below which the stock is considered to be at risk of collapse. So the reproduction and the success of the recruitment is really compromised. So this is the group of stocks that I'm going to speak about. So as said, having a look to the latest scientific advice, we can check that there are at least 25 fish stocks in the Northeast Atlantic that are in this situation. So this is a representative group of species for which at least one or more stocks are in a depleted situation. No? We can see, for example, sardine, lulin, eel, orange raffy, nephrops, cod. No, but now having a deeper focus on the worst performers, I will tell you that there are 3 species from left to right. So whiting, cod, and herring. So 2 stocks of whiting, 6 stocks of cod, and 2 stocks of herring made up the group of the 10 worst performance stocks. To show you which is the trend in the abundance of these stocks for the different stocks, so we can see that all of them are below these reference points that I was naming before, the MSY and the deem. So all these stocks are considered to be in a critical situation. And also if you can see in red, these 4 figures on the left for the 4 most overexploited stocks. So this number represents how far these stocks are from this management target of the MSY. So IDC whiting is only about 8% of the MSY biomass, and the same you can see for the others, for Western Scotland, Celtic Sea cod, and Western Baltic cod. No, so all of them are really in a worrying situation in terms of the abundance. Also, in case you want to see where these 10 worst performance stocks are distributed, so you can have an idea, and also you can see that they are distributed from the Baltic to throughout the Northeast Atlantic. About the reasons that will explain why these stocks are in such a dire situation, the first one that we will highlight is that the catch limits are regularly set above scientific advice. So before me, Arthur was pointing that around 2/3 of the TACs or catch limits are set above the scientific advice, and this is not, and this is even worse for this group of stocks. So if you take a look to the 4th and the 5th columns, So in the fourth column, you have the advice from ICES about what is considered to be sustainable for these stocks. And on the fifth column, you can see what was the decision on TACs, in this case, mainly by the European Union and the UK, because most of these stocks are shared stocks. And you can see that for all of them, they ignore the scientific advice. The only one that maybe we can have a kind of misunderstanding is for the fourth one, Western Baltic Cod. That advice was around 700 tons and the council adopted around 500 tons, but we have to highlight that in this case, the ICES advice included recreational catches that according to ICES also, they are estimated to be around 40–50% of the total catches. So in this case, they also ignore the scientific advice. So this is the first reason that will explain the status of this stock. And obviously, in our case, we are recommending to set the TACs in line with the scientific advice, and when possible, below this scientific advice, to have in mind other impacts and climate considerations. The second reason is that most of these stocks are caught in mixed fisheries. So this means that that when the fisheries are target, they are catching many species at the same time. No. So, for example, to give you an idea, most of the catches of Irish sea whiting are taken by fleets targeting nephrops, Norway lobster. Or, for example, most of the catches of west of Scotland cod or Celtic sea cod are taken by fleets targeting haddock in these areas. And the thing or the issue is that most of the times when they are adopting management measures, in this case, for example, catch limits for these stocks, these single stocks, they don't take into account what is the impact in terms of bycatch of these depleted stocks. So maybe they set a sustainable TAC for nephrops in the Irish Sea, but this means that it will have a bycatch of cod that is well above the scientific advice. So this can be replicated for the other stocks in other areas, but this is really a key issue of concern for the management of the depleted stocks. The third reason could be the non-compliance with the landing obligation. So all species in the Northeast Atlantic managed through catch limits should be retained on board and count against the quotas. And this is not happening. There are some indications that discarding is still happening in the Northeast Atlantic waters, what means that the real fishing mortality, the real catches are well above what is declared. And also there is another big group of reasons that will explain the status of the depleted stocks. So climate change is affecting the distribution, but as well the reproductivity or the capacity of reproduction of the species. There is a lot of habitat degradation in the marine ecosystem. In this case, I will refer particularly to the Baltic Sea. There are also issues related with the species interactions. So maybe the prey of these depleted stocks are not abundant enough in the ecosystem, so it's more difficult for them to recover. So there is a big list of reasons that could explain, but it is clear that the main driver that has put these stocks in a difficult situation has been the excessive fishing pressure that at the same time is making the stocks less resilient to all these other impacts and changes, as I said, as climate change or habitat degradation. And this is in summary what we have to say about these stocks. This is the final compilation of the recommendations, but most of them I have already talked about in the previous slide. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javier. So then I'll go to our third speaker, my Fisheries Secretariat colleague, Nikki Sporung, will talk about European eel. Nikki, if you can please share your screen, if you have slides.
Hang on. Everybody can hear me all right while I'm setting this up? Yeah. And you can see my screen?
I don't see your screen yet.
Oh, sorry about this.
There we go. There we
now.
go. Yes.
Yes. Anyway, I am going to talk about European eel, a critically endangered species with zero catch advice. And it's also on the agenda for the December Council, even though it's not managed by catch quotas. So it's not part of the negotiations taking place between the UK, Norway, and the EU, but it is a shared stock. And I don't know quite what background you have on eels. I'm just going to give a very quick overview to start with. It's a very widespread population that breeds in the Sargasso Sea, migrates to coastal waters across Europe and Northern Africa, and then a large proportion, around 60%, migrates further up into freshwater in all of these different countries. It has a very long life cycle. It lives between 10 to 25 years before it becomes adult and then returns on a long spawning migration to the Sargasso Sea to reproduce. During this long life cycle, obviously, it faces a lot of different threats, but fisheries is definitely one of them. And it's a high value catch. And because of its widespread distribution, it also is a management challenge. It has a sort of patchy framework of management in the different countries where it occurs, and through different organizations, not just the EU, but CITES, Commission for Migratory Species, the UK, and so on. But as I started to say, it is a critically endangered species. It's been listed by the IUCN on the red list as such since 2008. It has a zero catch advice from ICES, but it's a joint working group, so it includes scientists from the Mediterranean, the UK, Norway. So it's really a sort of a joint assessment. And you can see for yourself at this graph how much it's declined. And actually the decline started earlier than the 1960s, but the 1960s to the 1980s is sort of used as a reference period. It used to be one of the most common species in our freshwaters across Europe. But now its recruitment is down to less than 1% in the northern range, in the North Sea area and Baltic Sea, and elsewhere in Europe it just can be considered a sort of core area for eel. It's less than 10%. So it's really a species that are beyond all of the different potential reference points under the CFP. Despite this, it continues to be targeted across the EU and the UK. And I just wanted to show very quickly with this map, the white countries are countries that have no fishery, but also countries that are without this, outside of the scope of this presentation and don't have much eels anymore at all. But as you can see, it's only 2 countries in the EU that's actually banned all fishing for this critically endangered species. It's Ireland and Slovenia. And then we have Sweden, who's not allowing any recreational fishery, the same in Portugal and Greece. And then we have Belgium and Czech Republic, which only allows recreational fishing and no commercial. But across Europe, more or less, we have this range of countries that still allow not just commercial fishing on this critically endangered species, but also recreational fishing. The countries that has a G in it, that's countries that also have a glass eel fishery, but France is hugely dominating the glass eel fishery. That's really where more than 95% of the catch comes from. So why are we talking about this today? Well, it's been threatened for a long time, and there is an EU management framework in place. It was adopted already in 2007, and that requires EU member states to set up national eel management plans to aid eel recovery. And the UK also have these since they were part of the EU, and they haven't really changed their management framework very much since then. The EU also put up a trade ban in 2010 after the eel is listed on CITES as a threatened species, a species that's threatened by trade. So no trade can take place outside the EU, basically, from countries outside of the EU or to countries outside of the EU, just internal in between the member states. And then the Commission did propose to close all eel fisheries in EU waters in 2017, but this backfired quite badly. Member states were very upset, and instead it resulted in an additional measure, which is a 3-month eel fishing ban in coastal and marine waters that's been in place since 2018. And the eel regulation has now been in place for more than 10 years, almost 15 years. And an evaluation that was published earlier this year showed that despite this, no overall progress has been made on the recovery objectives. So the eel is not, the status is not improving. And the Commission, after IC strengthened the advice to zero catch for all life stages in all habitats last year, the Commission made clear that status quo is not an option. We have to do more to protect the species. And the same discussion has been had in the Mediterranean region under the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, and they actually did agree stronger measures only last month, including a ban of all recreational fishing in both fresh and marine waters. So the Commission has tabled a proposal quite recently, which extends this 3-month closure to 6-month period during the peak migration to protect both glass eel coming in, but most importantly, the spawning migration of silver eel. And they've also added a number of stronger language and a number of measures, that sort of boxes in the member states, because compliance under the 3-month ban has not been very good. It's some countries have basically closed the fishery when the eels are not migrating, and so you can clearly see in the proposal that the Commission is trying to get at this and basically force member states to close during the period when they were supposed to. So this is obviously not quite enough. I mean, we would like to have a complete closure in all waters for all fishing, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And the Commission has invested a lot of political capital into this proposal and the process leading up to it, and it's now in the hands of member states, and it's not looking very good. So despite the zero catch advice and not at all fulfilling the objectives of the common fisheries policy, there's been this massive discussion where member states don't want any more restrictions on fisheries. They say they've done enough, but actually catches have not declined in all countries. It's really a mixed bag. And if you look at the total catches across the area and the decrease in the population, we probably have a higher fishing pressure today than we did 20 years ago. Now the proposal is being discussed between the member states and the Commission, and there's a vocal resistance, and there's some countries that notably are very much against the proposal, which is France, Denmark, Poland, Germany, and Sweden. But none has so far spoken up in support of the proposal. So this is not likely to be resolved before the Fisheries Council in December, and could keep ministers up late at night. And the UK, of course, won't be part of this discussion, but they are also part of this advice, and they're still fishing and have also, in fact, created what's called the non-detriment finding under CITES to be able to trade outside of the EU. And I just wanted to finish with saying that this is really shameful situation, considering the critical status of the species, and that ministers will be arguing for continued exploitation while the global negotiations on how to protect biodiversity will be in full swing in Montreal under the Convention for Biological Diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. If you can stop sharing, then Gonzalo Carvalho can share his short presentation on deep sea species. While we're waiting for him for his screen to load, I will also inform you that we have prepared a short follow-up note for everyone with a brief summary of all the talks, including all the links to the relevant documents that you might find useful. We'll be distributing this directly after this briefing ends. Gonzalo?
Thank you,
any thoughts?
Ivana. I won't be sharing any slides. I'll
Perfect.
just be making an oral presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gonçalo Carvalho from a Portuguese-based NGO called Sciaena, and I'm here to speak about the need to be extra careful with what and how we fish in the deep sea. As you may know, this year the EU, in some cases in cooperation with the UK, will set TACs for deep sea stocks for the years 2023 and 2024. It is important to remember that we know less about the deep sea than we know about the moon. But as knowledge increases, we are conscious about the importance to biodiversity and about the role it plays in climate regulation. We also know that deep sea species and habitats and the habitats they live in, including potential vulnerable marine ecosystems, are highly vulnerable to damage from deep sea fishing that can take centuries to recover from. Worryingly, scientists indicate that deep sea fish populations in European waters are either depleted or lacking information to assess their status. Given these characteristics, deep sea species and the ecosystems they live in should be managed with significant precaution, and the ecosystem-based approach to minimizing negative impacts of fishing activities should be applied. However, as we've heard before in this session, EU fisheries ministers have repeatedly set TACs above the precautionary advice provided by ICES, or even in some cases removed TACs from many of these vulnerable stocks. This is completely contrary to the CFP's sustainable requirements. It also fails to deliver on the EU's international commitments to manage deep sea fisheries in a manner consistent with the global standard established by the United Nations General Assembly. Therefore, we are urging the EU fisheries ministers to set TACs in line or below the scientific precautionary advice, and urgently improve data collection and address current data gaps in order to enable. Sorry, someone speaking. Is it okay? To enable the definition of MSY reference points or suitable proxies for these stocks. We are basically fishing in the blind on many of them. We also expect zero TACs to be set for deep sea species that are recognized as vulnerable, threatened, or endangered, such as the round-nosed grenadier, which is listed as critically endangered in the North Atlantic in the IUCN Red List. And we demand that bycatch quotas are set to 0 for any deep sea species recognized as vulnerable, threatened, or endangered, such as the case of many species of deep sea sharks. The EU seems determined to change the status quo and take the forefront of deep sea conservation, as the landmark decision of adopting the implementing act on the closure of several VMEs to bottom contact fishing gear seems to indicate this decision happened just a few weeks ago, and indeed is a bit of a change, which is making a ripple effect throughout Europe and beyond. So we urge the Council to take another decisive step in this direction of correct stewardship of the deep sea by defining TACs for the next 2 years that do not exceed the science and take into account the vulnerability of deep sea ecosystems and the biodiversity that exists there. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And then our last intervention is by Rebecca Hubbard from Our Fish. And she will be talking about the role of fish in restoring fish stocks as carbon value and ecosystem value.
Thank you, Irena, and hello, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. And today I will just speak briefly about the value of fish in the sea and not just to be taken out as fish stocks. So instead of a bird, we're talking about a fish in the hand is worth 2 in the sea. So the values of fish to the ocean carbon pump and to the ocean ecosystem. So fish have been viewed largely as a resource for consumption and trade. And consequently, as my colleagues have just explained in terms of the status of fish stocks in Europe, fisheries management systems have been geared towards maximizing extraction of single commercially valuable fish species. But the truth is that fish are much more than that. They are carbon engineers, and they are much more valuable in the sea than in the net, especially if fisheries are not managed with an ecosystem-based approach. So I just want to give a little bit of an explanation about how that is so and what the Agrifish Council can do this year to help address that. So basically, fish are carbon engineers like whales and plankton. They form, or trillions of fish and animals and plankton form the foundations and the engine of the biological pump. And the biological pump is responsible for driving energy and carbon throughout the ocean. The ocean is the largest store of carbon on the planet and absorbs over 93% of the heat, the excess heat that we've produced as a result of global warming. But the thing is that the ocean can't continue to do this without a healthy biological pump. So as you can see here with this fantastic graphic, the fish and the plankton and the animals basically help to absorb the CO2, move it throughout the ocean, and help to ensure that it's sequestered away and buried in the ocean floor. And this process involves trillions, billions of fish moving throughout this deep twilight zone, up and down in the twilight zone. It involves whale and fish feces, and it involves the biogeochemical cycling of countless fish. But the thing is that each year we extract around 80 million tons of fish worldwide, and that obviously removes an enormous amount of blue carbon from the sea and releases that carbon into the atmosphere, but it also diminishes the ocean's capacity to mitigate climate change. Additionally, as I said, the ocean floor is responsible for or stores an enormous amount of carbon. The top layer of marine sediments stores nearly double the amount of carbon that all terrestrial surface soils store. So it's incredibly important. But every year, bottom trawling occurs in large swathes of the sea globally and especially in Europe, which disturbs and resuspends carbon from the seafloor. And finally, the burning of fuel directly by the fishing fleet releases an enormous amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In the EU, it's about 7.3 million tons of CO2 emissions each year, and that is subsidized because of subsidized fossil fuels for the fishing industry. So you can see that fish are incredibly important to the biological pump, and fishing has a significant impact on that. What we can do is ensure that good fisheries management delivers good carbon management and also ecosystem and biodiversity protection. So by increasing or restoring fish populations. We increase the number of carbon engineers in our biological pump by setting fishing limits at scientifically advised levels. We can protect the food web, and by avoiding damaging fishing methods like bottom trawling, we can avoid habitat disturbance and destruction, as well as decreasing the CO2 emissions and increasing the CO2 sequestration. So just in finishing, I mean, it's really just to reinforce the points that my colleagues have said, is that we really need to set fishing limits below maximum sustainable yield and follow a precautionary approach to rebuild populations and protect food webs and those predator-prey interactions, and ensure proper ecosystem functioning in the ocean. Although Article 2 of the Common Fisheries Policy is, as Arthur was saying, it's like the overall goal of the Common Fisheries Policy, we should consider that a minimum for fisheries management, because the Common Fisheries Policy also says we should take an ecosystem-based approach. And really, with the increasing impact of climate change and without increasing knowledge of the importance of fish in the biological pump, we really need to actually restore those fish populations. We also need the fisheries ministers can and should be asking the Commission and ICES, the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, to provide full climate and ecosystem impact assessments of fishing, so that we are accounting for their true impact on the environment, not just these individual fish stocks. Fisheries ministers can and have full capacity to allocate fishing quota to the least damaging fleet segments, so those that aren't damaging the seafloor, that aren't taking unnecessary, unwanted fish. And the fisheries ministers must manage the fisheries like our lives depend on it, because they really do. Without a healthy ocean, we would be in serious trouble, and it couldn't really continue to act to protect us from severe climate change as it is now. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That takes us to the end of our presentations. It was a quite wide sweeping view of many things related to EU fisheries and where the EU policymakers are failing. I would now like to open the floor. So anyone, please, I'm going to have to change my view. Anyone has questions, please raise your hand if you have them, or put them in the chat. I know that we already received some questions beforehand. I think they were sent to Javier on NEAFC. Javier, can you read them out and formulate a reply, please? You're muted, sorry.
Thank you, Irene. So we have a couple of questions related with NEAFC, which is the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission that is in charge of adopting management measures for the share stocks in international waters in the Northeast Atlantic. And the question is about if there is any reason why NGOs are only allowed to participate in NEAFC since 2021. Who is deciding on who is allowed to participate in NEAFC, and why do the decision makers have such a low interest in the NGOs' participation? So on that, it's not really that NGOs are not allowed to participate in NEAFC since 2021. So observers are allowed to attend NEAFC since the beginning. The reality is that not all the stakeholders are allowed to participate in the different committees that they have. For example, the control committee, we are not allowed to attend, but however, in the science and management committee, we are allowed to participate. But the reality is that fishing industry representatives have been since long time allowed to be part of the different delegations. So they were not even observers, they were part of the delegations of the different parties, but we were having a lot of difficulties in joining these delegations. Why? We should ask to the member states, but obviously, I mean, in my case, personally, I tried to apply for being in the delegation of Spain, for example, but I was never granted with this status for, I don't know, for different reasons. They were not really interested. I don't know if it's an issue of transparency, but I have to say that we are making little progress in this regard, but it's still, yeah, in the specific case of NIAF, there is still a lot of room for improving in terms of transparency and participation of different stakeholders.
Yeah, and just to add to that, just some little clarification. So a delegation member actually is on the negotiating team, so has an active role, while an observer can only observe. And this is not just in NEAF, we've also seen this, for example, in the EU-Norway negotiation, ongoing, that fishing industry representatives get a seat at the negotiating table where civil society doesn't. It's okay. Are there any other questions or pressing issues at the time? We also have NGO representatives from Germany, Sweden, Spain, France, the Netherlands here for if there are any country-specific questions or policy positions from countries. You can also ask these. Oh, we don't seem to have any questions on this time. Then I'm giving a quick word to all our speakers. Then for a final word, is there's one thing that you want to take away, one sentence you want people to take away from your presentation, can you give it now? And then we'll close it off. I'll start with the first one. Arthur, is there one thing, your main message you want people to remember from your presentation?
Yes, I will just first check if you can hear me well, because there were some issues.
If you sit like this and don't look away, we hear you very well, but you, as soon as you move away from your, it seems your microphone is quite sensitive.
Yeah, okay. No, I think it just, from ClientEarth side, is just, there are legal obligations, and we think that, yeah, next December, it's time for ministers just to look at the law and to respect it, and then everything should be all right. And thanks for this, Irene.
Okay. And Javier, what would your final takeaway be?
Yeah, so it's to highlight that the status of the depleted stocks represent a major failing in the management of the fish resources in the Northeast Atlantic. And there is not really open interest from decision makers to fix this situation. So this is a kind of recurrent problem that no one is paying attention, and there is really a need or an urgency in taking action to recover these stocks. And particularly because before I didn't have enough time to develop the recommendations, but it's key that the catch limits for the mixed fisheries take into account the recovery needs of the depleted stocks, because otherwise the recovery will never happen.
Thank you. Nikki?
Yes, well, I can say that it's somehow as if eel, lives in its own universe and not under the CFP, because there are other important fish stocks where obviously the council has decided to close the fishery before it's been critically endangered, as eels are. But with eels, somehow that has not applied. And now, in recent years, when the Commission has been trying to rectify this, member states are really fighting this tooth and nail. And they're not fighting for the same things everywhere, but they just don't want any more restrictions, basically. Some of them want to continue restocking, others just want to continue to fish. And so what is clear is that there's no agreement, but also that they're all asking for different things. And I really wish that they would, come to their senses and realize that even though it's a high value catch, that we don't need to eat eels to survive, and that we can protect it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have in the chat Marina Panicheva asking a question. Can you please unmute? Yes, there you are.
Yes, hello. So my name is Marina Panicheva. I represent a young European cross-border team of journalists that are interested in the issues of overfishing in the European waters. So I have a big question. So why will the European Union not set fishing opportunities for the shared fish stocks in line with the sustainability requirements? And can it be because of lobbying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, who of our panel would want to take that question? Gonzalo, you have a lot of, you're just also back from ICAT, where we also see a lot of lobbying going on.
Hey, good afternoon, Marina. Thank you for joining in for your question. I think you're on point. So many of us here have been for years trying to poke into this fisheries management world and these very, very, very closed silos where fisheries managers and fishers mainly have met for years and years. And it's really difficult to be there at the same level industry is, as was mentioned already. But also I think it's a question of posture, of mentality. These decision makers that often are seated at the table in fisheries discussions see themselves either more or less consciently as being there to ensure the continuity of fishing without thinking of anything else. And so, yes, I would say it's due to lobbying, but it's also due to this vision that this industry needs to prevail no matter what. And that includes ignoring all the signs that we have that we really need to ensure healthy marine ecosystems, also to ensure the continuity of sustainable fisheries. So those are for me the key reasons: lobbying, but also a very backwards looking way of seeing nature and our relationship with it.
And to add to that, we also see sometimes a difference in different sea basins, different areas. The Baltic TACs have already been decided. And in those, probably because the Baltic waters are incredibly depleted and just all stocks are basically crashing. We see that there, even from the Commission, there is the narrative is very different, and they're using more ecosystem considerations than they will use in other waters where we are not in such a deplorable state yet, which is an interesting divide where we see that probably maybe because on the Baltic they have been pushing this new narrative longer, that there now is more acceptance of changing it. So actually we have to, take a step back for the ecosystem, which we're not seeing in other areas yet. Thank you for that very interesting question. We have Jonathan Hughes coming in with also his hand raised. John? No? Okay. I'm guessing that was a question that coming later. Then I was going to leave the floor to Gonzalo just had a word. You can say something else about deep sea if you want. Or...
Very quickly, I think everything that applies to everything else that has been said has to be taken even more precautionary in the deep sea. So we really need to be careful with the deep sea. The more we know, the more we understand its importance for the balance of our planet even. So indeed, I'm hoping that ministers are extra careful this time with deep sea.
I'm actually seeing that's probably Charles Clover coming in. Charles, did you want to also have a question or a short statement? Sorry, we can't hear you. Charles, we can't hear you. No. No. Seems that the microphone is off in your computer, sorry. Okay, if you want to send a message afterwards, we'll take it. And then I will give the last word to Beck from our fish. Your last words and just considerations of this briefing.
Thanks, Sciaena. So I guess my thing that I would think it would be really great for people to take away is that we are currently on the verge of breaching multiple planetary boundaries, and we need urgent action on all fronts. And the fishing industry and fisheries itself has not been managed well for some time. And I think that we now have all the information that we need on how to avoid overfishing, how to maximize the ocean and fisheries contribution to both climate action, but also, you know, conserving food webs, protecting biodiversity, supporting coastal communities, and even food security. There is not a question of what to do. It's a question of, will the decision makers think bigger than the little fish ghetto that they are currently and have been in for some time. So I hope that journalists and others take that with them and pressure the fisheries ministers to make informed decisions that meet the challenge we're facing.
Thank you. Oh yeah, so Charles just put in the chat what his intervention was going to be about is actually that the work they are doing in the UK, in the Blue Marine Foundation, and other NGOs working on the UK side. So here focusing on EU here today, but in the UK, similar things are happening with their new Fisheries Act. And there's a challenge going on about similar to the one ClientEarth was talking about on North Sea cod. That also there we're seeing that the government is not implementing their own fisheries laws in the way that protects the most vulnerable species, and cod is an iconic species for that, because all the stocks, all the European stocks, are basically in a very poor state, and it used to be one of our most important iconic species, where all of us know cod fisheries from our countries. And it's really weird that and sad that it's even for that species is not working to protect them, just as eel, which is also, at least in the Netherlands where I come, one of the most commonly eaten species at some point. I think with that we are at 2 o'clock, and this is also where the translators have to log off. This presentation of this briefing will be available online later. We will send you a short note on the with the key takeaways from all the speakers. Thank you so much for the translators. Thank you for attending, and thank you to our speakers. And hopefully we'll see you again next year. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with all our experts and their comms officers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
For organizing.
Thank you, everyone.